Welcome to the Red Half of Sheffield, or should I title it the BBC Radio Sheffield trio? Joining us today is the third leg of the trio, and he was the hardest leg of the trio. It's a familiar voice you guys will know on your radio waves if you listen every Saturday when United play. It's Mr. Andy Giddings. Andy, how are you?
Hello, I'm very well. Thank you very much indeed for having me on. It's a great pleasure to be here.
Yeah, glad to have you on. Let's get into it. Andy, tell me a little bit about how you grew up and got into journalism in being the voice of, in my opinion, the voice of BBC Radio Sheffield. Give us a little insight of how you got into that.
Well, it's very kind of you to say. I've been there a long time, but yes. So I was just a sports mad kid. I loved all sports, but football clearly being a major one in my family, and I fed off that. So when playing football with school friends, and then going to watch my own team play. In my teens, I was quite fortunate that there was another member of my friend group who also wanted to be a journalist. He wanted to go off and do news, but I always wanted to go off and do sport. And I was very lucky that I got a taster while I was still at secondary school when I was 16 on the sports desk of the local paper. And then 3 or 4 years later through university, it was sort of knocking on the doors at the BBC in Leeds. And my career then gave me the opportunity to move south. And that's where I've been since 2003.
Oh, really interesting. Interesting. Um, I'll ask you this: have you ever done any stints on TV? We all know you from radio. Have you done any stints on television?
Yeah, I've had a little bit of television experience. A lot of it, what they call off tube. So some of it has been in the stadiums as part of wider broadcasts. But I've commentated on football, rugby league, rugby union, all behind the mic, but by and large off tube. And my World Cup commentary experience was off tube in 2002 as well for another broadcaster in Leeds. So I do like TV. It's a great experience, but radio is my kind of first love. I think even a lot of TV commentators perhaps still say that, but it's definitely better doing radio than TV, I would say.
Yeah, I agree with you because I mean I'm 34 years old, but I still find it better to put the radio on and listen to your commentary or whatever game I'm listening to. I find it 100% easier and in a lot get a lot more enjoyment out of listening to the radio. And I don't know, it seems like it's a more difficult deal than TV. Obviously, because on TV you have all the pictures in front of you and what's happening. Talk to a little bit about how broad of a picture you have to paint for somebody, in my case, listening from 5,000 miles away. And if I choose not to have the game on, I'm like, well, screw it. I'm going to listen to Andy in Radio Sheffield. Explain to the listeners how difficult it is every Saturday.
Well, one of the things that we have, along with yourself and all of the people that would take our coverage in, and one of the reasons why radio is just that little bit better, is your imagination. So we paint the pictures, and to kind of answer that question, sometimes you paint a picture and try and paint the picture as a whole because you are describing something that's unfolding between you, like a counter-attack, for example, or some kind of goal-mouth scramble, as I think about this off the top of my head. And yet at other times you find yourself being quite descriptive about something that's actually quite small, that's just happened. But it's important to illustrate that with Carl Assaba, who, of course, you will know as well, because it's an important part of what's just happened. So you find yourself at times giving quite a sweeping description of a stadium, say, for example, or like I say, a counter-attack, or you're actually talking about a foul and being quite prescriptive, because it's important that you, as someone that maybe hasn't seen the pictures yet and maybe won't see them until the highlights are placed on YouTube or what have you, that you get as good a view of it, or you can sort of mentally picture what we see. So
Yeah.
it's something that you get into a stream of conscious. I've been very privileged to do this job for such a long time now, that if you work at it, I mean, look, there are far harder professions, far more notable and worthy professions than mine, but you kind of learn through people that you respect when you're starting off. And look, every day, I mean, this summer I will learn something from somebody who's doing a game at the Euros or what have you, of how best to illustrate what I see that the radio listener can't.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, there's. I'm trying to think off the top of my head. I mean, there's a couple of talk sport commentators that do probably as good a job as you do. I mean, I can I feel it every game, like hanging on every word of what you're saying, and it's just you make the games that could be the most boringest games, like watching paint dry on a wall. You, often listen to them if I'm driving somewhere, and I'll be on the edge of the seat, and I'm like, it's 0-0, but he makes it sound like it's 4-4 in United, or who Watford are going up the other end and they're gonna score, and it's I don't know what it is or how you phrase it, but you in a sense leave the radio listener, I feel, on the edge of their seat for 90 minutes.
Well, that's very kind of you. A commentator who is far more celebrated than I am, and well, almost certainly will ever be. Peter Drury gave an interview to someone that I've watched several times on YouTube, and Peter, for anybody that listens to this who will perhaps take this in, who maybe wants to do this line of work, you have the privilege of being there.
Mhm.
You have the privilege of being in a position, in a seat, in a ground that somebody else would like to sit in. So be enthusiastic.
Yeah.
You can have a bit of a gag about the seats if it's cramped, or the food, which can sometimes be, not best for the diet, but ultimately you're being paid to be there. You're a football fan. You grew up, you were 6 years old knocking a football around a park, and now you're in a stand watching a team play that lots of people are wanting to know what's going on. Don't be bored.
Yeah, that's true. I mean,
Don't
honestly,
be bored.
that's words to live by, honestly, in a sense. Um, I will touch on that a little bit. Growing up, were there any radio commentators that put you in the sense of how I'm describing how I listen to you? Is there any, I guess, idols you had growing up?
It's a funny thing that I'm only minded to think about as I've got that little bit older. And the answer, in short, I think, if I'm being really honest, is actually no. Because when you watch the football, or clearly on TV, you were watching the football. When Radio 2, as it was back then, which became BBC Radio 5, was on in the car as you were coming back from the match, it was just part of the match day routine, and you'd be having a conversation about what you'd just witnessed in the short drive home, as well as trying to listen to what they were saying as well about who'd done what elsewhere. So the greatest kind of teachers and inspirations I've had were from day one, when I walked through the door at Broadcasting House at BBC Leeds. I was very fortunate that they employed 4 or 5 really brilliant commentators, not just in football, but in rugby as well. And it kind of went from there. And now I would perhaps say that in many respects, if you're serious about your craft, and look, Adam is and Rob is, we all are, there's always something and somebody out there that you can learn from. I as a fan of commentary, the art, and obviously the football, which is kind of still more important, listen to an awful lot of radio commentary. But with my ear, I'm also kind of thinking, oh, he and she's described that pretty well.
Yeah.
I might try and bank that idea. I mean, not to sort of turn into somebody that I'm not, because there are many sort of broadcasters out there that have a command of the English language that I would never have. And if I started using those words, people would go, "Have you what? Pardon me? Where did you learn? Who said that word first? And do you actually know what it means?" And the answer is probably no. But just little tweaks, techniques, just to kind of get you to somewhere. And I'm also very privileged that not just Carl Assaba, but let's mention him, Keith Edwards, and a lot of the other experts that we use. They're great to deal with. And if I'm relaxed and know that you can have a bit of a joke with them, or they're going to say something, or they themselves can describe what's going on pretty well, then it makes for a better commentary.
Yeah, 100%. Man, there's a lot that goes into it. I will touch on this. How fun is it on a weekly basis to have Carl Assaba right next to you every single game?
It's brilliant. I love working with Carl. He is, as what the impression you have of Carl Assaba, as a really nice, bubbly guy who seems to be very kind of self-deprecating in his sense of humor, is entirely true. That is what he is like, and it's great fun. And I have kind of a dry, acerbic sense of humor, so making fun of him, and vice versa, him, me, and Rob and Adam clearly as well, does help when it is 0-0.
Yes.
and maybe not a great deal is happening. And the fact that he's probably had too many sweets, so he's a little high on sugar, and the sports drink, which he'll probably have in the second half, is just about seeping in when it's not 4-3, or something more exciting than that, is brilliant. And it helps because each station's different, but because of a greener life and all of that, and money and petrol costs, we obviously travel here, there, and everywhere with our summarizers 80% of the time. So it's great that we're able to sort of have a relationship, build that relationship. It starts in the car, it continues on the radio, it continues in the car on the way home, and it's just worked from there, right from day one. I mean, the first game that I asked him to do was a 4-0 defeat at West Bromwich Albion. Yeah, that one. Yeah, Michael Verrips and all of that. Yeah. So if you can survive that as he did, and fans still liked him, then he's doing all right. And thankfully, he will be a big part of our coverage next season.
He does, or he acts in a sense of, if I was sitting next to you, his loud inflections when we didn't score many goals last season, but his reaction to when we even put one wide of the post, like, oh my God, this is a goal. In a sense, that was me when I was listening on radio. It's just like I would get excited with him, and then you, after everything settles, and you just like, oh, just wide of the post, and you once you calm back down, you're like, oh, but then it goes again, and it's, oh man, man.
That in that sense, then Carl being Carl, who brilliantly kind of straddles the line, and it's not an easy line or fence to sit on between a step back expert summarizer. You're not employed by the club, you're employed by us. You have to be critical should the need arise. Mm-hmm. And the idea of being that enthusiastic, actually you are a fan, and he's, well, I'm not giving any secrets away, Sheffield or just outside Sheffield. He's made that area of the country his home. He's lived in this part of the world for a long time now. The fact that you've got that impression, it translates well onto the radio, is a great thing. Is a great thing.
Yeah, for sure. And honestly, at some points he's brutally damn honest about how bad United are playing. And I mean, some people will get on his back and like, don't be too harsh. I'm like, no, tell me if they're playing bad. If you think the ref is screwing us over, why are we having 15 minutes at a time against Spurs when we should have 9? Let us have it. I mean, I like that about Assaba. And obviously, you're not going to rub everybody the right way. You're going to rub people the wrong way, and they're not going to like it. But I like how both of you, in a sense, are honest opinions, and you don't like hold back and you don't sugarcoat it for any reason because there's no reason to.
There's no reason to. And the reality is when you work for our station and the traditions long since sort of set, long before I turned up, etc. And the fact that we cover 6 clubs, you have to. Mm-hmm. You fans demand it. We want to do it. You can't really sugarcoat anything. You can't paint incorrect pictures. Partly because if it's poor, as it was, say for example, a very notable Carl Assaba rant was the Fulham game in the season just gone down at Craven Cottage. I mean, clearly, sadly, that was the day that Chris Basham was injured too. But the performance in itself, in terms of commenting about that was something that was described completely accurately. If we sugarcoated that, then on Monday on Football Heaven, you run the risk of somebody ringing up going, "What? What are you talking about?" Mm-hmm. Now, mercifully, that's never happened. That's not to say everybody agrees with me all the time. I wouldn't want them to. Sometimes, but yeah. So it's those types of scenarios, and yes, Carl is there with his red and white glasses on. I don't have them because it could be any kind of colour in South Yorkshire and North Derbyshire. You just have to, mate. You just have to. You can't, because you're letting yourself down, and you're letting, more importantly, the fans down if you are trying to sort of pull the wool. Everything's about an opinion. You and I could be sat in the same room, watch the same game, and have some kind of opinion that differs, but it can't be too far away. Otherwise, it's just incorrect.
Yeah, you're right. So I guess we'll touch on this. Have you ever, in live commentary, had a live gaff, and how did you rebound and move past it, if you did?
I'd love to say no, but there was some. I've had various different players where I've described them in one way and that's not being correct, or from a factual sense. Keith Edwards was quick to point out that there was a reason why Anton Rodgers was called Anton Rodgers, and it didn't register with me at the time. We're going back a while now, that it was Brendan Rodgers' son. Other than that, various different. I'm trying to think of something. There's something in my mind that Carl has picked me up on in the last couple of seasons, and mercifully for my benefit rather than yours, I can't actually remember what it is. But we're all prone to gaffes. Now, The one thing is, on radio, so long as it's not a factual error, because clearly that would be horrendous. The miscalling of a goal, getting the wrong player. If it's something that's in midfield or what have you, you can mask over that. YouTube doesn't help, by the way, when Sheffield United put the pictures out there, but you can kind of get round it, whereas clearly on TV you can't. But equally, they can pause for breath when the action's unfolding. We can't. So we just have to go with it and go with hopefully our eyes, if they're correct. And as you can see, I wear glasses. But mainly your gut, or you hopefully see a number or something if it's not clear and obvious from where we might sit in a particular ground somewhere. At Bramall Lane, the view's excellent, but that's not always necessarily the case up and down the Football League. That you get it right. And my greater gaffes have been on the phone in or recording interviews where we were playing an interview back down the line dropped out, the whole thing was recorded. I'd said not the worst swear word in the world, but oh dash, it's dropped out. And the unwitting producer back in studio just took the whole thing and played it out on air. So in theory, I've sworn not live on Radio Sheffield. It was only a minor one. And some of that wasn't my fault, but clearly it was because I had headphones on and I swore. So yeah, it happens. It happens.
Yeah, it's all how you handle it and how
Yeah,
you move on.
yeah. Sometimes they just want to drop you in it back at base for the Christmas tape. It's fine. It's fine. It's fine.
So in all of your years of commentary, it doesn't have to be Sheffield United. It could be anything. What do you think, or what in your commentary career is the biggest moment you've called?
Oh, wow. Well, as the gag goes, in South Yorkshire and North Derbyshire, we don't get European football, but we get a lot of trips to Wembley. So I'm extremely privileged that I've been able to do that more than I would ever have imagined growing up. Well, each of the other 5 clubs in the region have provided huge moments for themselves. So, for example, this time last year, Sheffield Wednesday's comeback against Peterborough was just unbelievable, bone-shakingly good. But for the purposes of this podcast, listeners won't necessarily be surprised to learn that it was just an utter rush to describe the immediate turnaround at the start of Chris Wilder's time in charge. The 100 points in the League One season and being there for 50% of those matches, including the matches at the end of the season when they did earn promotion and win the title. That then continuing in 2 years in the Championship, the actual moment against Ipswich Town, the winner at Leeds United when Chris Basham scored, and then the various different high points watching Sheffield United, barring a game or two, nearly get into Europe. Yeah. So that, well, hopefully if everything continues to work, will be unforgettable and a real 3 years of highlight after highlight after highlight after highlight that honestly would be here till tomorrow if I was to perhaps detail all of that and where I was lucky enough to be at a particular time, 2016 onwards. I appreciate it. It went south of a fashion quite quickly, but it was such an extreme low to high, if I can phrase it like that, that it's just utterly unforgettable.
Yeah, and it's one of those things now looking back at it, the old adage of you wish somebody would have told you you were in the good old days when you were actually in the good old days before they were gone. And yeah, now looking back at that, what a run that was. And whew.
It's perspective, isn't it? That, Sheffield United are a wonderful football club, but they are not a club that have spent many, many years in the first division, or well, clearly the Premier League, but the top tier of English football. So the fact that they are playoff contenders, hopefully at worst, in the Championship, and as Sheffield United like to keep saying, one of the top 30 teams within English football, so always within a chance of being back in the Premier League. But equally, the days of following Sheffield United when they were a strong, powerful Championship football team, the big nights under the lights at Bramall Lane when sides of a similar size, etc., would end up there, and there's so many big matches. It's just what we've seen. When Chris Wilder took over, it was not the lowest ebb, but the lowest position in 33 years to an extreme high, and the highest position I think they'd ever been, to it just kind of leveling off. So that they are probably slightly better off than their mid-table second-tier average. So hopefully that continues as they go forward, whether it's under this current owner or somebody else.
Yeah, we shall see. At the moment, you're kind of tapping the mic. Hello, anybody there? Hello. Anybody? Is Sheffield United dead? Are they alive? Where are we at? But
They're alive. It doesn't seem like it, and I get from a football perspective, the games, it seems horrendous. Clearly, they've had a horrendous season, and it's not as if they've even gone down particularly with much of a fight. And the fact that Burnley and Luton got a bit nearer to staying up doesn't necessarily reflect well on Sheffield United. It started badly. Paul Heckingbottom had his hands tied, and so did Chris Wilder, and that's how it's continued. But whether Prince Abdullah's still the owner of the football club at the back end of the transfer window, or he isn't, there are still reasons to be optimistic. Steve Betty spoke to Radio Sheffield and said, look, some of the financial issues that we had have been addressed simply by accruing money in the Premier League. So hopefully that will help them get on a firmer footing, and then they've got to just try and go again. I mean, if they are taken over, and I dare say we'll find out, well, I'm led to believe we'll find out more on that early July at the latest, then we'll see.
Yeah, for sure. One more before we get out of here, and I ask it on every person that comes on the Red Half of Sheffield. On the off chance that Mr. Andy Giddings isn't on the radio, and you have a chance to, whether it be rugby, football, or just sitting in your house, what is your go-to beverage? It doesn't have to be alcohol. It could just be tea. It could be alcohol if you want it. What is it?
Ooh, that's a great question. Well, yeah. So different times. So if I was going to say a match, I would want probably to have a beer on the way there, because one of the things that we don't have, this job is of extreme privilege, but the kind of fans experience that we used to have as late teenagers and sort of in our early 20s, where I at least, you'd make a semicircle walk from home to the pub and then drop down to the shade to watch the match and then walk home again. We don't get that. So it would be beer, lager. But I am increasingly becoming a coffee fiend, which can be interpreted as snob. So, I drink far too much coffee, but I do enjoy it. So it would be, and if you really had to sort of pin me down and say, you can only have one, then I think I'd probably pick coffee.
Mr. Staten is rubbing off on you, because I asked him the same question, and he says, I love coffee.
Well,
And
definitely. We see that. I think, undoubtedly. I mean, dinner times are a walk to a coffee shop.
Yeah.
And there's one in Sheffield at the minute. Look, there's loads of great coffee shops in Sheffield. We've probably been to them all, but an Italian one, and they do great coffee. And it's kind of, whoa. So if you at sort of 1 o'clock this morning when I'm wide awake still, but when I get up in the morning, first thing that goes on, the coffee machine.
the same thing at my house. I'm right there with you. Well, the man, the myth, the absolute legend of Sheffield United and everything in Yorkshire and North Derbyshire, as I've heard him call it over the many years of listening to him on the iconic BBC Radio Sheffield, Mr. Andy Giddings. Thank you, sir, for everything you did. Guys, before we go, I'll drop everything at Red Sheffield on Twitter, YouTube, Red Half of Sheffield. And until my next preview interview with somebody tied to Sheffield United, I will leave you with Up the Blade.